Sup, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this rip of TFTC. Thank you for joining us. Give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel. If you catch us on podcast apps, make sure you subscribe there. Give us a rating, a review. Go to tftc.io as well. Become a member of the site. Join the conversation. Truth for the commoner, trying to get you the high signal content in a world gone mad. This rip was brought to you by our good friends at River. River's here to make it as easy as possible for you to buy Bitcoin and then take it into self-custody. Go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. You'll get $5 of Bitcoin after you buy $100 worth of Bitcoin on River. You can dollar cost average into Bitcoin with no fees. If you're just buying one off, River has the best fees in the industry. They back all their Bitcoin reserves 1-to-1 in multi-sig cold storage. They highly recommend that you take self-custody. They just introduced limits. So if you want to set a limit order below or above the current Bitcoin price, River makes that extremely easy as well. They also have real customer support. You can pick up the phone and call them if you have any questions about your experience on River. So go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. Enjoy this rip.
Ooh, Logan, that was a quick trigger. I didn't even get to finish my sentence. We jumped right into it. Whitney, Mark, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Great to be here.
Well, thank you, Mark, for getting a proper mic for this. The audiophiles who listen to the show are going to be very happy. This is
yes. I am a man of the people, and when the people yell and scream, I listen and I respond, and I throw money at the problem. And here we are, loud and clear, coming through. So yeah,
it's the audiophiles. They attack me. The YouTube comments. It's like, make sure your guest has. I'm like, I can't control the guest mic. And freaks, if you're listening, it's not like I side channeled with Mark. He listened. I didn't even have to tell him. He's got the mic. We're here to talk about something, Whitney. I think me and you started talking about this broader subject last year with Ian Davis, with the Sustainable Development Goals series that you guys wrote, and this attempt to monetize swaths of land, natural resources throughout the developed world.
Yeah.
And Mark and yourself wrote a piece, came out April 4th, so 12 days ago, Debt from Above, the Carbon Credit Coup. It seems like there is an initiative to push these efforts forward that involves a lot of things, particularly satellites and Bitcoin sidechains. So I think before we touch on the broader topic, maybe we can touch on that later. Let's talk about the specific piece that you two co-wrote. What is going on?
Right. So let's start off from like the broader part. So yeah, like I came on with Ian, I guess a year or two ago. And before that, I came on with you to talk about natural asset corporations, talking about this broader effort. One of the people leading this, of course, are people like Mark Carney, trying to recreate the global financial governance system, recreate the multilateral development bank system. And a big part of this is juicing up voluntary carbon markets and making them voluntary in name only, and really making them involuntary carbon markets. And there's a lot of reasons why they want to do this. Specifically, it's a big shift towards, I guess, supercharging commodities and tokenizing them for this coming financial system. And of course, carbon is one of the, a big commodity that they want to, introduce into that. And a big way they're doing that is through the financialization or securitizing of nature. And so there's that's a big part of the play here. So specifically this piece, this is a 2-part series. So the first part, the article that's out now, is specifically about this thing called Green Plus. And green here is an acronym. I can't remember exactly what it is right now, but it's in the article. It's something like greenhouse gas reduction and emissions for net gain or something like that. I don't know.
It's government reduction of emissions for environmental net plus gain.
I had some of the words in there. Whatever.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
They're getting crazy with these acronyms. Somebody's going to remember that.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, there's several founding members, and this program has obviously had several iterations, but it's honestly a very secretive program. And the longer it's gone, the more time has gone on since it was first seemingly launched in 2022, the more obfuscating they've become about the details around it. And so the only program description that's really available of it anymore is on the, of the nuts and bolts of what this program is supposed to be, is on the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive. But the program is still on, and if you look at the website for the program, now it's just a countdown to Miami Climate Week, which is at the end of this month now, this April now, pretty much. And it's a countdown to when they launch the rest of the satellites for this program. And so this is basically, a carbon credit system enacted by via contractual obligations that NGOs are sort of yoking the public sector to. It's a public-private partnership, essentially, which is how they're pushing a lot of this SDG, Sustainable Development Goal stuff through in general. And so by doing it at the subnational level, they don't have to interact with the national level. No congressional approval, Senate approval. They're going straight to city halls, essentially, and getting mayors and the heads of municipalities to sign on to this thing and basically give this program the rights to turn the protected areas. And the goal is, of course, every municipality in Latin America, give them the right to turn those protected areas into natural equity through the creation of carbon credits that are produced off of these protected areas, with the supposed benefit for the public sector of getting money from the sale of these carbon credits in return. But there's, as we discussed in the piece, there's a lot more going on there. And a lot of this is something that's been overlooked in the context of carbon markets, is that there's a big surveillance component to it, surveilling where the carbon is sequestered that underpins the carbon credit. Yes. And so a big part of this piece is about the satellite firm that was contracted to do this specifically, which is called Satellogic, very deeply enmeshed with U.S. intelligence and U.S. intelligence contractors like SpaceX and Palantir, which I've, done a lot of work on Palantir over the years. And basically the ambition of Palantir is to be a relaunch of the Total Information Awareness Program that we've talked about on the show before, TIA, they tried to launch after 9/11 and then was shut down because they said it would eliminate civilian privacy throughout the United States. And I mean, it has done that, but it's a private sector only thing. They took DARPA out of it really in name only, to be quite honest. And so anyway, this particular satellite company, which has ties to DARPA and DHS and the NSA and what have you, and has put Palantir in space, basically, is the company that's going to be surveilling all of these forests and really beyond that, the municipalities as well in Latin America, because one of the partners of this particular initiative called the Energy Coalition, the head of that, in the press release announcing this, and their team up with the Satellogic satellite company, said that the goal is to measure carbon emissions from space and make that part of this voluntary, that's not really voluntary carbon market. So, you're emitting too much carbon, you're using a wood stove, you have too much, you have too much livestock, I don't know, or you're emitting too much heat for reason X, Y, and Z in this urban area. We're going to surveil that from space and charge you accordingly, or you will have to purchase this many offsets or this many credits. It's part of this, deindustrialization agenda, and only those that these guys can industrialize and use energy, and those that they don't like or are doing things they don't like. It's a way to, force behavior by, making energy money, essentially. Among other things, obviously.
Yeah, a couple things here. Highly skeptical. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the technology has advanced to a point where you can actually surveil carbon emissions from space, but it's how are they even calculating this? How could you measure this from a satellite? Maybe I'm completely speaking out of my depth here, and the technology does exist, but I find it very hard to believe that you can accurately measure all these emissions from a satellite. And then two, Whitney, it's not surveillance. It's observation. It's just Earth observation. They're just observing the Earth and issuing these credits. Okay, let's get the language right. It's not surveillance. We're just observing here. Observation
is preservation. Okay, that is a phrase of Satellogic, this company. It's simply observation. There's no surveillance here at all. To comment on the first part, in regards to like the technology, I actually think the technology, unfortunately, is there, and it's there for this is obviously a private company, Satellogic. We can get into some of the background of it, but I mean, right there on the board, right, we have General Joseph Dunford. Who's partnered with Steve Mnuchin and with Liberty Strategic Capital, which is one of the funders and founders of Satellogic. But there's a lot of government and intelligence ties, and American infrastructure ties with the Caterpillar company, just like right here, all on the board of Satellogic. Basically they have the technology to be able to, as you said, observe space to an incredibly accurate degree. I'm trying to see exactly what their, what the lenses that they use are. I'm not exactly sure where we put it here, but these satellites drop. They use Amazon Web Service, which is obviously a CIA contractor, and has worked with the Pentagon with their Space Development Agency, and they're beaming down 50 gigabytes of data per day, which is obviously an insane amount of data. And so there's incredibly high res imagery that's being taken by these very small satellites. This company is basically giving access to, the world's data to private companies, to governments, and really any VC firm or local or national government that wants to partner with this company. They're able to get access basically to Earth observation data that normally is pretty much, only for nation state level intelligence agencies. So they've basically privatized, the NSA and the CIA, which obviously, we know about through, In-Q-Tel and through Palantir, which are, essentially kind of these two arms of the public sector intelligence becoming private sector. And now it's getting to this place where, places like Paraguay and some of these municipalities that are mentioned in our piece are now being able to access, for a fee, data from Earth. This is, of course, obviously done under the means of providing a service and not just observing every, square inch on Earth. And it's done under this way of, hey, you have an oil company, and you need to watch all of these pipes. Great. You want to do that with an airplane, it's going to cost hundreds of dollars an hour. You want to do this with a satellite or a group of satellites, a constellation service, that's going to go down to, below $100 an hour, $60 an hour. So it's kind of done under this economic of, scale, and pitched as this, basically the market is asking for this. When in reality, you look at the people that are, behind it and what are the means, behind this expansion into space, as Whitney said, Palantir in space, essentially. And I would say there's certainly much more nefarious intentions behind this group. And we can get a lot more into it for sure, but that's a little primer on Satellogic there.
Yeah, after reading the piece and discussing the subject with you two in chat, it seems like this is the next. I mean, Whitney, we talked about this with Ian and even before that, but it's like the next iteration of junk bonds brought to. They're just going further out.
Yeah.
As soon as one thing fails, they're on to the next thing, and this is the next thing. And there's a lot of people that have historically been involved with these synthetic markets that Wall Street spins up to get some yield out of the greater public. And this is simply the next iteration to that with a sci-fi twist to it.
Yeah, I mean, literally the junk bond predators from the 80s are the people financing this now and involved in it. It's very crazy. And actually the person that created carbon trading essentially, is this guy named Richard Sander, who is also credited with being the father of financial futures, credited with essentially creating the collateralized mortgage obligation. He was a senior vice president at Drexel Burnham Lambert in the 1980s, made millions upon millions of dollars during the junk bond palooza over there that caused that bank to collapse. And then he was contracted basically by the Bush administration, Bush Senior, to develop an offset trading scheme for Bush Senior's EPA for sulfur dioxide emissions, I believe. And then after that program, he was contacted by Maurice Strong, who's this UN guy, but very scandalous figure, very deeply tied to Rockefeller interests, for example, and just, the worst of the worst oligarchs. And figures in the predator class of note, I guess. Maurice Strong was a frontman for many of them. At the UN, he's the guy that put on the Rio summit that launched Agenda 21, now 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. He had Richard Sander come and basically launch the whole idea of creating this private carbon market as a solution to the climate change situation. And a lot of these same figures in this particular UN Rockefeller nexus have been involved with things like trying to limit population and industrialization through groups like the Club of Rome, which is discussed in this piece because one of their descendants in terms of organizations is one of the governing members of this Green Plus carbon market program called the Global Footprint Network. Yes. And these guys, the Club of Rome essentially grew out of these different organizations that were part of sort of the influence, the axis of influence of the Rockefeller network, specifically in Latin America, which was involved in the installation of at least some of the US-backed and CIA-backed military dictatorships in Latin America in the 1980s. But one of these organizations was called ADELA, again, another acronym. And basically what this was where major multinational corporations and oligarchs of Europe and the United States essentially acted as kingmakers for who would become the corporate titans, or rather the oligarchs of Latin America. And this is something that they've done not just in Latin America. They also did it during, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, for example. And all of these state-owned assets of Russia were privatized and put in the hands of these carefully selected oligarchs. And of course, the architect of that system in Russia, right, that's Larry Summers in Harvard doing all of that, essentially, under Clinton. And so that same system has been done, I would argue, really throughout the world. And so this was done in Latin America through ADELA, and ADELA sort of spurred the creation of this Club of Rome organization, which goes very much together with this national security memorandum that was issued by Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration, that basically frames high birth rates in Latin America and allowing them to industrialize to developed country levels as a threat to U.S. national security, with the goal of having, basically allowing these figures, the desire to control, how, their population figures and how, far along they industrialize and control of their resources. And, essentially this program, what we're talking about now, is a modern iteration of all of that. And you have all of essentially the same players that have historically been doing this to Latin America specifically, but also beyond Latin America as well. Doing this, for the modern era, attempting to put it all on blockchain, have it all be a surveillable, digital enterprise, essentially. And I think it's quite sophisticated, honestly, the way that they're going to try and market this, because what they've been doing, and I think we talked about this last time as well, is that, fundamentally what's running the world right now is a global public-private partnership. And so what's been demonized, not necessarily wrongly, within the independent media sphere post-COVID, has been the public sector. And of course, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, all of those guys are not good at all, right? But it's a public-private thing. And so there's been a lot of focus on how the public sector part of this is bad and corrupt. And the answer that we're being led to is, let's just put it all in the hand of the private sector. But the World Economic Forum is the private sector, and they've created these public-private partnerships, because it converts the nation state into the enabling environment for all of these policies developed by, unelected oligarchs who are stealing people's wealth through these insane wealth transfers and are the people that ultimately control, the Federal Reserve, for example. The Federal Reserve is seen as, the central bank, it's a state connected entity. To an extent, I guess that's true. But I mean, people should know in the US that it's commercial banks like JP Morgan and Citigroup that really own and run the Fed. And people forget that. So if you're going to move from, Jerome Powell to Jamie Dimon, I don't really see there being any functional difference in what that means for the common person. You know what I mean? And so essentially what's going on here is that you're having a mix of both happening here. And, if they're not going to succeed in selling programs through the public sector, they're going to go to the private and be like, let the free market decide. But these are not free market people. These are career financial criminals. These are like the Drexel, Burnham, Lambert goons. And people like that, engineering new ways to engage in blatantly illegal financial activity and fraud and steal. And that's what a lot of these Wall Street giants have been doing for a long time with complete impunity. And the idea that they should, be given full free reign to do that just because public sector bad, that's the trap I think they want us to fall into. And unfortunately, these are the same guys that we know what they've done before, and they're financing this stuff now. So in addition to Richard Sander, you've Michael Milken himself, a big junk bond guy. He's all in for the Sustainable Development Goals. The person that ran his crypto initiatives is now running Algorand, which is getting involved with this kind of stuff as well, with stable coins and efforts to implement CBDCs. They're partnered with some of the people we talk about in this piece, Koi Bank specifically, trying to get involved in El Salvador's digital money paradigm, among other things. That's a bit unnerving. And then, of course, you have Craig Kogut, who was directly involved in the junk bond department of Drexel, Burnham, Lambert as well. He directly finances several of the groups that helped create this Green Plus program, and is also financially entangled with the head of Satellogic, the satellite company that's underpinning all of this. So these Drexel guys are here in full force. I would argue that, yes, the carbon credit, the voluntary carbon market, is junk bonds on steroids, frankly, because it's being framed as a planetary imperative. We must participate or we will all die, is essentially what they're arguing, right? But it's participating in their grift. I mean, these carbon credits have time and time again been exposed, not just by people that don't like, the idea of climate change policy in general, traditionally on the right, but also like environmental groups on the left that are like, please govern me harder, daddy, about climate change. They're like, no, carbon markets are bad too, because these credits are meaningless, essentially. And it's creating a new market for all of this stuff that they can just essentially looking for new ways to enable them to continue their extreme fiscal irresponsibility in both the private sector and the public sector, and allow them to steal everyone's money and wealth.
Yeah.
I think Craig Kogut and Milken are it's a really good example of this private public partnership cabal thing, because what was the thing, everyone is cheering for Trump to pardon Assange on his last days in office, and who does he decide to pardon? Michael fucking Milken, who is an absolute, I think Whitney called him a literal ghoul on Twitter the other day, which is absolutely true, a total ghoul. And so Craig Kogut was like, I believe, the lawyer for the junk bonds department, basically, and for Milken, kind of doing this huge fraud. And he, of course, founded Pegasus Capital, Apollo Global Management. Pegasus Capital is one of the main funders of CC35. And before Pegasus Capital funded CC35, Emilio Cargaman, who's the founder of Satellogic, they did a joint venture together under the Pegasus Capital name called Aconcagua Ventures, which served as Aconcagua Ventures, which served as a member of the Special Projects Group for the World Bank. And then, of course, creating Satellogic, which sort of spun out of this core securities technology group, which was co-founded by Cargaman and Riccarde, who's the CTO of Satellogic now, who listed having clients as like the NSA and NASA, Lockheed Martin, and DARPA, kind of in the late 90s. This group also, Core Security, was connected with the Endeavor Foundation, which comes up all across the board with connections to Reid Hoffman and a bunch of PayPal guys with Marcos Galperin of Mercado Libre, all of these groups. But Craig Kogut, is hugely important in the junk bond scandal. It's like they're not only is it the same mechanisms, just with kind of a blockchain twist, but it's the same people, and it's the same people that are getting. Basically using the government as this enabling environment, using the pardoning power of a banker president and a private sector ghoul like Trump, who did so many things at the behest of private companies, whether it's big pharma, whether it's these banks printing trillions of dollars, locking down the country, pushing vaccines, and basically going in lockstep, basically with the world empire in COVID policy. The last thing he does before he walks at the door is free this ghoul and Michael Milken. So you're really seeing this thing kind of begin to take shape. And another, I think, essential thing in regards to the Trump cabinet and this whole play is stable coins, right? And we talked about this a bunch last time, but specifically there was this letter sent from Kushner to Mnuchin referencing this blog post by Sam Altman about the creation of this USD coin, and using a dollar stable coin, and how this might be an important lever for our cabinet and for our government to sort of take advantage of, to basically perpetuate the treasury market and US dollar denominated liabilities across the world. And so what did we actually see in regards to using the government as an enabling environment? We saw the officer of the comptroller of the currency, which is basically the highest position in the government of financial litigation and law. We saw a former VP of Coinbase and a former One West partner, Brian Brooks, come in and sign legislation that basically said that all banks, private banks, could hold crypto assets and specifically could play with stable coins and use stable coins. And then, of course, on the board of Satellogic, the chairman of the board is our boy Steven Mnuchin, who, of course, was put in by Trump to run the Treasury, who printed trillions of dollars in connection with Jerome Powell and the Fed for COVID stimulus. But basically, they allowed this entire operation that we're now seeing through the private sector coalition that's basically I wouldn't say is coming out of Argentina and out of South America, but it's certainly rooting very strongly there. And we're seeing so many people connected with this group that is essential infrastructure to the dollar stablecoin cabal, I guess. There's very few people more important to the digitalizing of the dollar than Steve Mnuchin, and then, of course, Howie Lutnick, who is also on the board of Satellogic, whose company Cantor Fitzgerald took Satellogic public. And his company, Cantor Fitzgerald, holds the majority of the U.S. Treasury bills for Tether, which is, of course, the largest stablecoin provider in the world, at just under $110 billion market cap. Is on the board of Satellogic, took the company public. I mean, is an essential part of Satellogic. So we have Steve Mnuchin, we have a former general. We have a guy essential to the Treasury Ponzi continuing and the digitalizing of the dollar via Tether, all connected, to this one satellite company that is offering a service to be able to uphold, what essentially, breaks down to parametric insurance clauses and other data points that can be fed into a blockchain that can actually enable dollar-denominated liabilities to back real world assets. So we're going to start to see, kind of this very spooky coalition come to formation and begin to see really this play to dollarize really the natural world in this way that is backed by data from satellite companies that are run by historically ghoulish private and public sector. I hate to just keep saying ghouls, but I mean just these worst of the worst people that are upholding these very important positions all across this entire CC35, Green Plus, and Satellogic combination here of private sector businesses. You really see this conspiracy begin to take shape.
Yeah, coincidentally enough, Steve Mnuchin and his private equity arm just took over New York Community Bank Corp as well. Yep. So building on what Brian Brooks did and everything going on with Satellogic, that's a very timely and strategic acquisition for Mnuchin specifically.
Well, those guys specifically, Steve Mnuchin and then Dunford came on to that firm. And it's also U.S. Trump's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, and some other people that were under Mnuchin at the Treasury Department that make up that Mnuchin-led VC firm that we're talking about here. Their first investment when they launched was in this company that I wrote about, I guess 4 years ago now, called Cyber Reason. And the reason I'd written about them is because they were gaming out the use of cyber attacks it was a foreign company, Israeli company, gaming this out with the US DHS, the Secret Service, and other parts of U.S. law enforcement, including local police departments. I think the first one was actually with the Boston PD. Gaming out the precise conditions that hacks would have to do in order to get the U.S. presidential election canceled and martial law declared in the United States. And again, this is like a foreign intelligence company, Cyber Reason, and Mnuchin, that's the first investment they make as a VC firm. And at that same time, they were also trying to recruit to the VC firm Yossi Cohen, was director of Mossad while Trump was in office. And instead of going to Mnuchin's firm, Yossi Cohen went to SoftBank, which is the main investor in Cyber Reason, and now runs I think one of the main arms of SoftBank's and that decides their investment portfolio and whatnot. So a lot of weird stuff going there in the realm of, is this a U.S. or Israeli intelligence link with the Mnuchin VC firm? It seems to be both, if you ask me, especially with someone like David Friedman there, who during his tenure as ambassador to Israel for the U.S. Was pretty open that he was, very, very cozy with the Netanyahu side of things, which, I mean, the Trump administration in general was, because Trump's biggest funder during his first campaign and first term was Sheldon Adelson, who, of course, is now deceased. But, Sheldon Adelson is the reason Trump put in John Bolton, the reason he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, among many other things, and is also was a big funder of Netanyahu as well. So a lot of cross-pollination there that's worth pointing out as far as Mnuchin goes. But Mnuchin is definitely a figure that people need to, remember about, because now that it's like a presidential election and everyone's like, oh, which side are you on? Biden's terrible. And so if you're not with Trump, you're with Biden. That whole mentality is back. People kind of forget that Steve Mnuchin was a guy that should have been prosecuted for what he did in the 2008 financial crisis, and he wasn't. And then Trump puts him in charge of Treasury, while head of Treasury, as Mark pointed out, engaged in very, very bad and fiscally irresponsible policies under COVID. And a lot of that, those irresponsible policies, the effects of which we're still feeling now, and robbed Americans of the significant amount of their purchasing power. Essentially that money that was printed was handed off to BlackRock, Larry Fink, to hand out to whoever he, felt deserved it, whatever that means. And of course, before Trump was in office, his family's finances were managed by Larry Fink, and he appointed Larry Fink to his business counsel, and definitely is a big fan of Larry. So people need to keep this stuff in mind now that it's election season.
And who was the DA in California that should have prosecuted Mnuchin, but didn't. Kamala Harris, of course. Also, I just want to say SoftBank's SBLA Advisor Corps was the lead investor of the PIPE offering of $100 million for the Satellogic SPAC with Cantor. And JP Morgan, of course, served as the exclusive financial advisor to Satellogic. So just to wrap up some of those names in there.
Yeah. Whitney, I think what you just said about Mnuchin's time as Treasury Secretary is very important because, again, this whole concept of a public-private partnership and the facade, the mirage that there is actually anything separating the private and the public sector these days is very important for people to understand and really internalize. Is that the WEF, whoever it may be, they're trying to put us in this frame where it's like, hey, we have the private sector and the public sector, and we need them to cooperate. When in reality, they're more merged than ever before. Yeah, these revolving doors. Yeah, they are the same exact thing. They're trying
different hands of the same person, and they're demonizing one hand to send people into the other hand, and this is what they always do. And you have to realize that both hands are bad. Don't go in either hand. You know.
Well, that's you have to reject their frame. Yeah, don't go in either hand. The frame is between the space between the hands, and they're just getting ping pong back and forth. And Mark, I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. This is why I'm in Bitcoin, is because at the core of this quote unquote public private partnership is the ability to print money out of thin air and throw it between the hands. And so whether it's the emergence of junk bonds, we mentioned Pegasus connection to Apollo. I mean, that was a big thing in September of 2019 when you had that overnight repo spasm. Totally. Many people don't know this, but the Fed created new facilities that allowed hedge funds to get access to the Fed window. And then with Mnuchin's very irresponsible fiscal policy and the expansion of the debt since 2020, the Fed and the Treasury have been put in a position where they essentially are merged at this point. There really is no difference between the two. They have accounts with each other, and they're sort of just sloshing funds between each other. They are essentially merged. And so there is no private-public separation. So this idea of a private-public partnership is all bullshit. It's all the same thing.
Especially after the dissolving of certain, legislation, that prevented kind of banks becoming investment firms and these really big, interstate entities, right? I mean, in 33 under FDR, we had Glass-Steagall be put in, which was, basically prevented banks from, certain types of investment.
Commingling commercial deposits with insurance products.
Totally. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then, of course, what did we see? We saw in the mid 90s, we saw Greenspan, who later, went on to run the Fed. We saw him, put out a pamphlet while at JP Morgan that was, rethinking Glass-Steagall. We saw Larry Summers help dissolve this, who, kind of very infamously kind of jumped back and forth between some of these private and public things, as well as, universities with Harvard as well. And so we saw kind of this push of, back and forth, this ping-ponging of when there was an advantage to be within the public sector. These people are in the public sector. When there is an advantage to be in the private sector, these people are in the private sector. You look at someone like a Mnuchin, ping-ponging back and forth from One West when, hey, we can take advantage of, now that Glass-Steagall is dissolved, we can take advantage and basically use taxpayer money to back, this ridiculous, CDO, CMO gambling with, retirement funds and people's money that should be, much safer. We can go gamble and have a bunch of fun. When this all blows up, taxpayers are on the hook, and there's too big to fail. With the basically the creation of Citicorp and Chase and all of these groups kind of coming together to become too big to fail right at the same time as these regulatory basically methods that would have prevented these things from happening are being dissolved by goons put into power to dissolve these laws. Now they're back in the private sector. They make a bunch of money off of it, and then they come back into the public sector right before COVID. And Brian Brooks and Mnuchin kind of set up what they need. Using government as this enabling environment to set up the blockchain carbon credit system. And then as soon as they're done and the Trump presidency is over and they've done what they needed to do, they leave and they go back to, the private sector, and they set up, these systems to take advantage of basically private capital creation. Stable coins, I think, are very misunderstood because it's not like they're really this novel technology. I mean, dollar creation has pretty much always been a private sector gambit. It's just now it's on a blockchain and it's digitized. But, a group like Cantor holding, 80 billion plus or whatever percentage of the Tether bonds are holding, that was always something that was done by private sector banks. And now we're just seeing it done with a much smaller, instead of having all of the energy and manpower and office buildings and real estate needed to run, a huge international operation from a banking standpoint. Now you can basically run Tether with, 50 employees or whatever, and be $110 billion, private capital creation entity. So blockchain basically just allows them to, perpetuate the dollar, but perpetuate the treasury system, and then do it in a much more efficient way without requiring all of this overhead. So I think these systems were very deliberately put in place, by these ping-ponging private public sector ghouls to, make them a ton of money. There's a reason why Howie Lutnick has come out and said that he loves Bitcoin and he loves Tether and he loves Circle, and they're making a bunch of money for him, within a high interest rate environment, holding 80 billion plus or whatever they hold in treasuries, earns them 5% or something like 5.5% in a year. That's a huge amount of money when it's billions of dollars for basically nothing. And they get to use, those funds to buy Bitcoin and make a bunch of money and appreciate the appreciation of Bitcoin that we've seen this year as it just gets more and more scarce. So, yeah, I think this idea of this private public barrier, it's just completely dissolved, and we're really at a point, I think, just in general, where we've really hit this world empire context, and I think a lot of people, as it comes down to election season, as we start to see, again, conflicts in Russia, Ukraine, or in Gaza, it's like people just immediately fall back into these two-party systems and this private public system. And I think most of these are generally just distractions to keep us, to pick a side and be against the other side rather than really be against the hidden hand that is really controlling both sides of these dynamics. It's so easy to fall into, and they're getting so clever with it. We're seeing this huge explosion of interest in Austrian economics, this huge explosion of sentiment of libertarianism, through a Malay. And what is Malay actually doing? He's selling all the lithium to Israel. He's dollarizing the country. He's putting out a red carpet for Musk and for Larry Fink to just come in and privatize the country and dollarize the country even more than it already is. And I think that there's a lot to be learned by basically the Hegelian dialectics that are being employed on us to be distracted from these mechanisms that are really being put in place. And when you see something as dire and as extreme as intelligence-linked satellite companies creating a metric and a mechanism to dollarize the forests and real-world assets and create commodity-backed stablecoins to completely take out the power from the state and give it to private companies, this isn't necessarily the win that we all think it is as, kind of liberty-minded people. I don't want Steve Mnuchin running my money, whether or not he's running Satellogic or he's in the treasury. He's not to be trusted. And so I think we're falling for this dialectic and this false choice quite extremely, in my opinion.
Quick break here, freaks. This rip is brought to you by Gradually Then Suddenly, a framework for understanding Bitcoin as money by Parker Lewis. I wrote the foreword to the book. I'm honored to have done so because it's the best 0-to-1 primer if you're looking for a logical explanation of why Bitcoin obsoletes all other money. Buy one for yourself and maybe a few for your friends. Go to thesafehouse.com/gradually. That's thesafehouse.com, safe spelled SAIF, thesafehouse.com/gradually. Use the promo code TFTC for $5 off at checkout. Buy it now, freaks. The price of Bitcoin is going up. You need to understand it. This is the best 0-to-1 primer. Back to the show.
Do you really think people are falling? I think, luckily, you two wrote this piece to get in front of what's happening next week in Miami. And I do think, I see it just from the conversations I have at 1031 talking to institutional investors, and they're all caught hook, line, and sinker on the tokenization of assets meme. They think that is the future. That is what they're investing behind, throwing a lot of dollars at. But like I said in our chat, I do think there is a chance that this all implodes in on itself, and particularly because it's such a complicated system. You're combining satellites with these physical, natural assets on the planet, and then you're throwing a blockchain in the mix. Not only a blockchain, a side chain, and then on top of that, tokens. And there's a lot of problems that can arise from that. But before we get into that, I think maybe this is a good point to let the audience understand how the blockchain aspect fits into this. What are the mechanisms that are being used to tokenize these carbon credits, these assets, to create these stable coins? And so you guys highlighted in the piece, pivotal part of technology in this whole mix is a Bitcoin sidechain, merge mine sidechain. Rootstock, RSK, is a more popular known on Twitter specifically. It's been around for a while. I've been joking, like they've been looking for product market fit for the better part of a decade now. It seems like they finally found it. So Mark or Whitney, if either one of you two want to explain what Rootstock is, how it works, then we can get into the nitty-gritty details of the financialization of these assets via Rootstock.
Yeah, totally. I think before getting into maybe the blockchain aspect of it, I think just zooming out one more layer just to like green bonds. And we're starting to see these kind of like cleverly authored green bonds that aren't using blockchains yet. But essentially, what a bond is, you're buying up debt and you're getting a yield, through this maturity over time, right? So, say you buy a 10-year bond, in the 8th year, you're getting a 1% coupon. You're getting 1% on your clause. You could write this bond that says in year 8, 9, and 10, if you haven't reduced your greenhouse gas CO2 emissions by 50%, compared to where you were, 8 years ago, instead of paying out 1%, it pays out 0%. So you can basically write these huge bonds that are being done everywhere. We're seeing them issued by Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, HSBC, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. These huge firms are doing these green bonds. They're not necessarily incredibly new, but they're very popular now. Some huge companies like Verizon has done, huge companies. So basically what you need to actually enable a bond kind of authored in this way is you need some kind of broker and some kind of insurance company and some kind of data that is accredited that can be fed into some arbiter that can actually determine at year 8 if this company has met the requirements to get that 1% coupon, right? So you can think of it without a blockchain and just, okay, you need basically some company that can be accredited, that can measure the greenhouse gas emissions and be able to, agreed upon when the bond is authored, that in year 8, we are going to provide you with a number. And if that number is below, X percent, then you don't get 1% of $1 billion that year. Say it's $1 billion bond. That's a significant, market. That's a significantly expensive thing to basically have, a brokerage firm, some, paying the lawyers to litigate this, having the data provided. There's a lot of points of granular points to actually uphold green finance. And so a firm like, or rather a sidechain like RSK, what it can do is it can actually basically act as all of those things, as the litigator, as the broker, and as the settler, as the place that the actual assets are settled by using assets that are put onto a blockchain. The only thing that it can't really do is basically be the oracle to feed data. Blockchains are kind of clunky and stupid in a lot of ways. And it's hard to, put in real world data into a blockchain. It's not necessarily that easy to agree upon it. So you have to have a company like a Satellogic basically be the accredited satellite that measures these emissions, and then find a way to be the oracle to feed that data into this cleverly authored smart contract bond. So rather than relying on JP Morgan and like locked-in insurance and some other accredited carbon company, you can reduce your costs significantly by using a side chain like RSK. RSK, basically what it is it's just a way to do Ethereum on Bitcoin. So basically it has a clone of the Ethereum virtual machine that allows you to take any contract written in Solidity, which is the programming language of Ethereum, and actualize it on Bitcoin using this merged mining peg. So RSK has all of these things. It has identity systems already built in. It has the ability to create carbon credits. We've seen, groups use Ethereum already to create, carbon credits already that are just financial instruments that are tokenized, where they can basically tokenize, tons of carbon emissions, and trade it on Ethereum. Well, now RSK allows you to do that exact same thing, but just put it on Bitcoin. And of course, RSK and Rootstock, it's a federated sidechain, but it was created by people generally in Argentina that have all of these connections to a lot of the people involved in this group. I believe that there is a bunch of connections. I believe they share a board member, Joey Garcia, with Wences Casares' Zappo, which was I think he's kind of a name that a lot of modern Bitcoiners sort of forget, but a really important guy, kind of considered the patient zero for Silicon Valley, that basically introduced Bitcoin to Peter Thiel, to Reid Hoffman, to the PayPal mafia, and he was very connected with PayPal and Facebook. He worked on the Diem project that failed. But yeah, RSK shares a lot of people, with this Zappo group, with this Endeavor group. And RSK, basically allows stable coins, identity systems, carbon credits, any of these cleverly authored smart contracts to exist on Bitcoin itself. And so Bitcoin, rather than being just this kind of settlement network for Satoshis, can now actually uphold stable coins, carbon credits, other assets, and can have these cleverly authored bonds that get fed data from, say, a company like Satellogic, and be able to uphold a carbon market, real world asset, commodity-backed stablecoin is now possible to be upheld on Bitcoin, which is, again, that's kind of what we talked about last time with this Fink universal ledger. He called Bitcoin a technology for data storage, for asset storage. And RSK basically is kind of an enabling environment for this, as well as doing a lot of other things. But I think that's kind of the role that it plays in this system.
Yeah, to semantics here, like it
Sure.
is RSK is merge mine with Bitcoin, just so audience who's coming to this and may not be fully immersed in Bitcoin like we are, Mark.
Yeah, sure.
It is not technically like at the protocol level. So like this merge mine side chain, this peg side chain, federated peg essentially anchors into the Bitcoin protocol, and then has this EVM that operates separate to the Bitcoin protocol, but it does anchor in to get the benefits of Bitcoin's finality, settlement, robustness, resiliency, yada, yada, yada. So there is like a degree of separation from Bitcoin, the core protocol, but it's anchoring into that. And that's my biggest curiosity. And again, I told you guys this in chat, but I'm really interested to see if they can successfully do this, because when it comes to the smart contracts, the virtual machine, I mean, historically, Solidity has been a very unstable and insecure scripting language. I don't know. I haven't been following RSKs closely in recent years, so I don't know if they've made advancements at the scripting language level that make it more secure. I'd be highly skeptical of that. Then you have this Oracle problem. Satellogic is the Oracle here, feeding the data that releases funds one way or another within the smart contract. And then, so that whole process there, all it's going to take is one mismeasurement of data being fed to a smart contract and money being sent the wrong way for somebody to hold their hands up and be like, this is complete bullshit. Like, how do we know this data?
Yeah,
that's where
totally.
you really get down to it. It's like, and this is where the ruse is because I find it hard to believe that you'll ever be able to have verifiability of the data actually being pure and accurate.
Yeah, so there's this whole thing going on in carbon markets right now because everyone involved has been outed for being, well, not everyone involved, but basically the whole market up until now has basically been outed as being very grift prone, lots of fraud, lots of negligence, et cetera, et cetera. So the way they've been planning to get around this, and this is reflected in the Green Plus program, is through parametric insurance, like insuring carbon credits, so that if the fraud and negligence continues to occur, which it will, it's now insured. And now the insurance market has a new market for products.
Holy shit.
Right? So there's no need to correct or to end the rampant fraud in carbon credits. They're just going to add a new layer of insurance
derivative
products now. Yeah. And there's all the big insurance companies are getting in on this. And then there's new companies that are coming out of nowhere that are specifically specializing in carbon credit insurance. And then there's the other thing too, that you have some of these entities involved, basically looking to urge the planet, like the Global Footprint Network through the Club of Rome stuff. There's very prominent Club of Rome figures that for a long time have talked about if we can't depopulate peacefully, we will need to implement a benevolent, smart dictatorship. Okay. If you've ever seen the movie Brazil that came out in the 1980s, this is all basically about this bureaucratic monstrosity dictatorship government, and they make a mistake and all these people suffer all these unfortunate happenings that end in death and torture and things like that, because they're trying to rectify the mistake that the state made, right? So when you have a totalitarian system and they make a mistake, they don't own up to the mistake. You know what I mean? Good luck trying to go through the bureaucracy that they create as part of their benevolent, smart dictatorship to try and be yeah, so I didn't get my carbon credit allowance or whatever, or you guys messed up my climate wallet. Can you fix it, please? Honestly, they don't really need it to work the right way. And I think, that's been my criticism of stuff about, the AI industry too, that they've been overselling it for a really long time and trying to be we should put AI in charge of all these things, even though a lot of the algorithms in terms of their accuracy aren't independently audited. And sometimes they can be as low based on the company's own metrics of 70%, probably a lot lower than that, probably no better than a coin toss. Things like that. They don't care. It's all really, I think, about the illusion of those systems being in place and this whole idea, sort of the physical underpinnings of the panopticon in general, the idea that being under constant observation will make you behave, even if they don't do anything, because they're watching you and they could do something. There's a lot more to this than I mean, I guess that's kind of dark in a way to point out. Sorry, but it's true because these people are incompetent at times, and they're trying to launch stuff, I think, before they really have these systems ready to go in the way they want them to be. Yeah. And so the idea is we have to not interact with these systems at all. The way out of these kind of things is to not comply, because so much of this, Green Plus, I would say, is the start of getting this really out there and like at scale, with people not really paying attention to it and framing it as, part of the climate crisis response. But this whole play of digital ID, digital wallet, surveillable, programmable money has advanced a lot. And it's not just CBDCs. The CBDC discussion is about keeping attention on a very narrow band of what they're doing, but it's much broader than that. So what we really need to do to defeat things like this is to not engage and become part of that system, because we risk entering into this Brazil style type dictatorship that's incompetent, but also like very totalitarian and authoritarian and violent. And you don't want to brush up against that, because it's not like they'll correct their incompetence when they get caught. I mean, look at how the system is now. I mean, It's basically like digitizing that system, developing it at scale, and it's a way for, the crony capitalists, these there's so many different ways to talk about them, but, essentially they're the people at the top of the 1% that engage in blatant financial criminal activities to steal from people beneath them, right? And so they want to deepen the divide between the haves and the have-nots, and they want to basically make like digital barriers to maintain that, and AI is part of that. And these systems, this whole idea of like carbon offsets and the carbon market in general, most people aren't going to be able to afford all the offsets that the elite are going to be able to afford. Right. I mean, it's a way, this is all part of this system, and that's leading us to neo-feudalism. As I've called it before. And so essentially, we really can't get out of this if unless we choose not to interact with the system and create something either parallel, or just find some way to live your life without having to really interact with the digital ID and the digital wallet at all. And there's a lot of different ways it seems like it's coming together. The World Bank is working with Google and a lot of these other entities, including the ones in this article about Green Plus that are direct partners of Green Plus, to create the climate wallet. That's tied up with the whole idea of doing CBDCs and all of that, right? And things related to that, the private sector equivalent. They call it the climate wallet. Yeah, because it's all tied up with carbon emissions, and there's this, the carbon taxes and all of that. And this is why, I would like to point out, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but bring it up again, the whole idea of SpaceX being involved in launching these Green Plus satellites. Elon Musk is a big proponent of carbon taxes and has been for a very long time.
Well, he benefits massively.
And of course well, sure. And he's framed himself as being sort of this like libertarian free speech hero after, his acquisition of X, which, again, he's been fairly open about. His goal is to turn X into WeChat USA and make it half of the financial system, I guess, to start. But beyond that, the idea is to also have, carbon emissions, carbon taxes, intimately interfaced with this coming digital ID, digital wallet paradigm. And there's a lot of different efforts to create those systems, but it's not just going to be one system. It's going to be a mosaic of interoperable systems. ID 2020, for example, a big force behind the vaccine passport push during COVID, for example. That's the Rockefellers and Gates and all of that. It's not about making one global digital ID. And unfortunately, a lot of people in independent media, when there was a lot of reporting on this during COVID, missed the boat on this one. It's not about one global digital ID system. It's several digital ID systems that are all interoperable. And to have them all interlaced with each other so you can export the data to one global central database. And it's the same for, CBDCs and the stable coins and all of that. The goal is to have it all be interoperable and all the wallets. And the same is true also for the carbon market. And all of these are meant to go together. The pillars of the new financial system, this new financial governance system, involves all of these things. And so, we a lot of times the carbon market gets ignored. A lot of times the private sector CBDC equivalents get ignored. But we need to look at this stuff holistically, because there's a lot of other stuff going on here. And, we are ignoring the carbon aspect of this to our peril, because this is, again, as we said, or as we discussed earlier, a new reiteration of the junk bond villains, as it were. But now they're not just trying to take bad debt and they're using the natural world to fuel their debt schemes, basically. And there's also this effort that's been, posited by Larry Fink and Mark Carney and people like them to reimagine the World Bank and the entire multilateral development system, which for its entire existence has been about debt enslavement, mainly of the global South. And so those same people say one of the key ways of financing Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, is debt. So we have to saddle these countries in debt, and we have to, because of this idea that if we don't do this, the planet will explode, we have to get people to develop these smart grids and all these different new technologies that we say they need, and implement these carbon markets and these surveillance paradigms, all under the guise of combating climate change. That's not what Satellogic is there for. If you're really about combating climate change, you don't set up a system like Green Plus, where at best 40% of the proceeds from the carbon credits go to decarbonizing initiatives that aren't actually about decarbonizing. It's going to a crony company that's one of the guys involved in creating Green Plus. It's his company, and it's about building smart grids and smart cities from the microgrid utility level up. I mean, that's not anything. That has nothing to do with saving the planet. That's about creating a slavery system and a control system so that the debt lords can suck us dry forever with technology. And that's essentially what's happening here. And it's very bad. And I would really like people to start to wake up about this. But unfortunately, a lot of the discourse has been very narrow, and it's getting narrower because we are in an election year. So if you bring up the fact that both Democrats and Republicans are on board with this kind of crap, people will be like, oh, but no, my guy is so much better and that guy's so bad. And this binary thinking crap with presidential elections has to stop. The CIA has meddled in elections all over the world and overthrown governments all over the world. And our elections have always pretty much been fake since they've been around. So this election is no different. I know that people like the whole idea of we need the political savior to come save us. Let's get the right guy in the White House. What a mess our whole country is. We need to get the right guy in the White House. The guy in the White House is always a front for the bankers, and it's pretty much always been that way. The CIA itself, it's the bankers. If you look at the early CIA, it was all bankers. It was Wall Street lawyers out of Sullivan and Cromwell. That's who's been doing this the whole time. And now they're enslaving the planet with spy satellites. And they're the spies, So, I don't know. I just get so tired of the election rhetoric sometimes. People just really need to understand that this is the bankers. They run the public sector. They run the private sector. This is a financial slavery system. It's the slavery system they've been using for decades, but on steroids. And in Latin America, their big focus is to integrate Argentina and Brazil. They want to do the same thing to South America that they did to Europe to create the European Union, which is start with a free trade agreement for all of Europe. That's how the EU started. It evolves into this bureaucratic totalitarian behemoth, and it's yoked to the US through the Eurodollar. They're doing the same thing in Latin America. There's all these different iterations of it, right-leaning and left-leaning, which are basically all globalist governance attempts for South to integrate South America at the regional level. There's PROSUR, there's Mercosur, there's UNISUR, there's ALADI, there's all these different acronyms There's the Organization of American States. The goal of all of these, one way or another, is to regionally integrate, whether it's under right-leaning dialectics or left-leaning dialectics. That's what they want. And they want a free trade of the Americas. So not just NAFTA, that was the North American one, right? They want one for all of the Americas. They want to regionally integrate all of the Americas at the economic level, lead it down this path towards bureaucratic regional governance to be part of this global governance patchwork thing, which has been, the push for arguably a very, 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 very long time. And they want to do it with spy satellites and all this other stuff going on. But the idea is to do that same model using the EU, but they want to yoke it with dollar stable coins, not the euro dollar necessarily. And so the Argentina, Brazil and Argentina are the ones they need to have most under their thumb because they're the biggest countries in size of South America. You get Brazil and Argentina, you basically get the whole continent. So my concern is you're going to have them try and do it the right-leaning way through people like Javier Milei, and if they get him back in power, Bolsonaro, and frame them as, they're defeating the baddies, but really they're just, they're the other hand, like we discussed earlier. And what's interesting too is like a lot of this group that's discussed in the Green Plus piece, RSK, the satellite firm, and some of the connective tissue between them that includes, Zappa, Wince Casares, and these figures are essentially like the Argentinian branch of the PayPal mafia. A lot of their companies were funded and directed by this entity that Mark mentioned earlier called Endeavor, which is chaired right now by Edgar Bronfman Jr., who, if you've read my book, you'll know a lot about the Bronfmans and organized crime and political power. They're, for example, the family that essentially bankrolled Justin Trudeau in Canada, among other figures. And they're very powerful. Reid Hoffman of the PayPal Mafia and LinkedIn and whatnot, also a very close Epstein pal, is also very intimately tied up with Endeavor. And the companies that Endeavor helped create are some of the biggest companies in Latin America now. Many of them are based in Argentina. The biggest one, of course, is based in Argentina, the first Endeavor success story, which would be Mercado Libre. Which is Marcos Galperin, who, as Mark mentioned earlier, he's on the board of Satellogic, involved with a lot of these other companies. Mercado Libre itself is very much interfaced with Paxos, PayPal, and groups like that. And it's sort of like what happened earlier, what I mentioned earlier about those figures, sort of king making the corporate titans of Latin America. So this is like a modern iteration of that with like the same players. They're funding these startups and ensuring which companies get big and if they succeed, but they're, Endeavor's not an Argentinian entity. It's an entity run by people like Edgar Bronfman and Reid Hoffman. And so there's an Endeavor Argentina branch in pretty much all of these companies that we discuss in the piece that are based in Argentina are part of this Endeavor Argentina network. And Argentina is where I would argue, are going to test out a lot of these efforts, most likely under Milei, because he's very amenable to these kinds of policies. And so one of these figures that comes up a lot in the piece, this Diego Gutierrez, he's one of the co-founders of RSK, of Rootstock. He gave this very revealing interview about a year ago, and he was talking about several things that I think are important to bring up in the context of this interview. One of them is that as Bitcoin becomes integrated into Wall Street, Bitcoin has to shed its ethos, as he called it. Essentially, it has to stop being a tool of dissent, a threat to both commercial and central banks, and essentially become their tool. That's what he says. So for Bitcoin to succeed, in his eyes, that has to happen. So that's very telling. And then he also says that there's going to be a concerted push to move away from money printed by the state, meaning central banks, and instead move to commodity-backed stablecoins where the people that own the commodities will have all the power. I think that's very interesting. Because obviously Milei, in his case, right, came to power framing himself as very libertarian, but his policies thus far have shown him to be very crony capitalist, in my opinion. We've talked about this before, and Mark brought up some stuff, to that point. But keep in mind too that a lot of the people in in his government are from JP Morgan, for example, or the Argentinian branch of major Wall Street banks. He's been very closey with people like Fink and Musk, as discussed, among others. And very friendly with like Zelensky and the Ukraine stuff. I mean, this is not a very libertarian guy under other metrics. And there's been a lot of, antagonism with him and Argentina's central bank, which of course is responsible for a lot of bad stuff that has happened in Argentina. But people also need to remember the history of how Argentina got here, which as a lot of this fiscal trouble for Argentina began when it was run by a U.S. and CIA-backed military coup, then under Carlos Menem, who was the great, I say this great not in the actually like, oh, that was great sense, like big, I guess, the big neoliberal in Argentina recent political history, who was basically just like a goon for, U.S., foreign interests really to like gobble up Argentinian resources. Milei is a big fan of Menem, and some of his the people that are in his government started their political careers under Menem, like Patricia Bullrich, the interior minister, for example. So, you could really frame Milei as a continuation of that stuff, because Mauricio Macri, a lot of people in Milei's government are from the Macri government, especially his economics team. There's a direct line to all of that. And so I am very concerned that, that would be celebrated as like a big, yes, he's gonna, the central bank's not gonna print the peso anymore. It's over and he's saved Argentina. Well, is it really saving Argentina if he's, going to make, they're going to use dollar peg stable coins. They're regulating the cred of Bitcoin right now. They're going to move to this whole model of commodity-backed stablecoins, which is already actually happening in Argentina. A company backed by Visa that's based in Argentina is tokenizing basically all of the country's grain deposits to use that as currency. So whoever owns all of the grains, and the biggest landowner is a big former backer of Mauricio Macri, part of Endeavor Argentina. His name is Eduardo Elstein. He owns all of the commodities. He's also a big shareholder of some of Israel's biggest companies. He's going to be the guy that basically controls the money then, right? At least with the grain-backed stable coins. So if you have all these oligarchs in charge of different industries, which is essentially what Argentina has been becoming and has been happening really everywhere around the world, who's going to be in charge of the money? Is that really better than the central bank having it? Because remember, the central bank's run by the commercial banks. So you're just getting, the same shit under a different, name, basically. I don't know. There's a lot of different stuff going on here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. But, sorry, I'll let someone else talk. I've been rambling a while.
No, it's amazing. I think the way you talk about just sort of this establishment of, commodity-backed stable coins and money, it gets back to this idea of kind of what Marty was saying earlier. Well, there's still the Oracle problem. There's still all these issues of making a federated sidechain work. Well, then you look at, where did the money go? A lot of this research came from looking at VCs and looking at where the money came that, funded and founded these companies. And you look at, you talked about X. A lot of people forget Elon was heavily involved in PayPal, and X was, initially an idea that came out of the PayPal primordial goop. And we look at this PayPal mafia and how it's spread everywhere. And the first idea of Bitcoin sidechains was introduced in the sidechains paper in October 2014 by, all of these Blockstream employees led by Adam Back. The next month, weeks later, the seed round for Blockstream is led by Reid Hoffman. And what this sidechain concept, did basically was allow Bitcoin to uphold other ledger assets and give the ability to, transfer these assets between multiple blockchains and give new functions to assets that they already own. And, you look at, okay, well then who was the money behind PayPal? And you look into it and you see who is the seed founder of PayPal, and you get this guy, Bill Elkis. Bill Elkis was a former trustee of the Jeffrey Epstein Foundation. And in 1997, he co-founded Clearstone Venture Partners with this guy, William Quigley, who later went on to co-found Tether. William Quigley also, co-founded Sunlot Holdings with Brock Pierce, when Mt. Gox went under to try to buy up the assets of Mt. Gox in bankruptcy, and they were advised by Louis Freeh, who is a former FBI director. But
Under Clinton,
so you're, yeah, exactly. And so you're seeing, okay, PayPal is all over this thing. Bill Elkis connected directly with Epstein. Howie Lutnick, the guy that holds all the treasuries for Tether, purchased an estate, from Comet Trust, connected to Guido Goldman, connected directly, a neighboring estate to Epstein's house. I believe he bought 11 71st Street, East 71st Street, and Epstein was 9 East 71st Street. And then you look into PayPal and you see, okay, well, who's kind of doing the digital infrastructure for the blockchain of entity basically of PayPal? Who's allowing all these things to happen? And it's this company, Paxos. And then you look at the board of directors for Paxos, and we got Bill Bradley, who's the managing director of Allen and Company and a former U.S. senator from New Jersey, as well as this guy Jim Mancy, who's former. He ended up being at IBM. He founded a company that got purchased by IBM, but a chairman of this Lotus company. Both of those guys, Bill Bradley and Jim Mancy, were on the board of directors for this East Coast company, Cargo Metrics, run by this gentleman, Scott Borgardson, who was believed to be husband of Ghislaine Maxwell. And basically, Cargo Metrics was kind of like the first Satellogic, in that it was this ocean observation company that was providing all of this data, collecting all of this data on shipping lanes, and basically looking at how, again, in this world empire context, looking at all of the transportation of commodities, of people, of whatever it is, but anything traveling on ships across the oceans. This company was basically collecting all of these data. Cargo Metrics is literally the name of the company. Both of these guys are on the board of this company, and now they're both on the board of Paxos here, 10 years later. And Cargo Metrics ended up becoming this data company, and then it turned into this like quant financial trading desk. Because what actually happens when you have all of this surveillance data, you have an extreme heads up and leg up, rather, on other people trying to trade in these like global Forex markets. We knew Epstein was a really big Forex trader. There was actually a letter from Lynn Forrester to
Rothschild.
Correct me, Whitney. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. To Bill Clinton in the White House about how they discussed currency stabilization and Jeffrey Epstein. And Epstein was heavily considered to be really into Forex trading. And that was kind of his passion in a lot of ways. And how do you get a leg up on all of these things? Is you get extensive amounts of data. And then you create infrastructures that allow you to do trades and move large amounts of liquidity and settle large amounts of liquidity within the realm that you acquire all this data for. So you're beginning to see these are the same people that were heavily connected not just to intelligence, but basically the mafia that controls intelligence. And they are heavily connected already to again, Paxos runs, the PayPal stablecoin. I had a conversation with the head of strategy there, Walter Hessert. And again, I'm not accusing him specifically of anything or anyone specifically of anything. But, he spoke of, the stablecoin, market and basically said that, there's an opportunity here for regulation to come in from the public sector and basically kingmake, the stable coin remaining in the private sector, but, king making who gets to basically create the dollar denominated liabilities for this, future economic system. And Paxos is really set up via PayPal to be an essential infrastructure provider for the modern economy. And they're, seed founded by Bill Elkis, directly connected with Epstein, has direct connections to Tether, to former FBI directors, to Brock Pierce, And here they are connected to Cargo Metrics, this other, Ghislaine Maxwell connected surveillance company turned, quant trading desk. And we've seen this time and time again with the Maxwell sisters, with their, early adventures in basically in data harvesting and data collecting through the early internet, through Magellan, one of the first internet search engines, which I believe was Christine Maxwell. And then later, I think Whitney could probably talk more to this, but later through, I think it was called Chiliad, which later then became LexisNexis. And, a lot of these companies that get these huge amounts of, direct funding and contracts from U.S. intelligence, kind of came out of the same mafia, Mossad sort of entity that, we all look at, kind of the Epstein group as kind of this human trafficking, cabal, which is, obviously true to some degree, but there's an incredible amount of data and, foreign exchange and currency financial hitman, basically. Everybody kind of generally forgets, how much of how he was tied into a lot of 2008 and a lot of these firms that blew up. And so, you really zoom out on a lot of these things and zoom in on specific people, and it's the same people, it's the same mechanisms, they're just being modernized. And this PayPal mafia is just everywhere, all over this whole blockchain and Bitcoin world. And I think it's really interesting that Blockstream themselves, generally regarded incredibly highly in the Bitcoin space, have such huge connections with, Reid Hoffman, and then of course with Bitfinex and Tether. And there's a huge push within the Blockstream, with their Liquid Foundation, basically their own federated sidechain, to incorporate Tether into the Bitcoin ecosystem. You're seeing companies really and spokesmen and discourse really pushing towards this. This digital dollar system as, something that will basically enable number go up for Bitcoin. But I think there's a lot of caveats to that. And I think we have to really, take a step back and not just let number go up kind of, induce this amnesia over the Bitcoin community that, there's a lot of, I'll call it orange washing. A lot of these sidechains are not a net good for people. They are able to create digital ID systems, perpetuate the treasury system at really, really high velocity. But, they make Bitcoin go up. So, we cheer them on. And I think when you look at, some of the people that are really behind these mechanisms, who funded these mechanisms, why these mechanisms were created in the first place, and you begin to see kind of this darker picture. It's very concerning, in my opinion.
It is, but I would push back and say I don't think these sidechains have gotten anywhere near the degree of adoption that the likes of Blockstream or RSK, for that matter, would like. Like Blockstream's been pushing Liquid for 6 years now, and you can look at the Block Explorer. They have one transaction per block, and it's the Coinbase transaction. Like I think it's good to see that, like, there's I don't know if it's a natural aversion or just nobody's picking up what they're putting down in terms of, like, the Bitcoiners that I know and the companies that we invest in, like, none of them are incorporating Liquid or any of these side chains because it's like, that's boring. It's not really enabling the sovereign future that we're going after here. But it certainly is the case
totally,
that everybody...
I totally agree, because right now we're seeing all of these ID systems and dollar stablecoins be on like Ethereum or Solana, right, or whatever, these bullshit side chain, or not side chains, but like alt chains. But what happens when the public private gang teams up and they go, hey, Ethereum is a security, Solana is a security, you need to use Bitcoin because it's the only digital asset that's not a security. And then all of that movement gets pushed onto Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden liquid is an integral pillar of basically these systems, because they no longer can be upheld on Ethereum or on these other things. So there is actually this potential for basically setting up kind of the vacuum for when they pop the bubbles of these side chains. Where do they flow to? Do they flow to Taproot assets on Lightning Labs? Do they flow to Liquid? Do they flow to RSK? I think we're going to see some sort of regulation. The Fed, the Congress, they're very much so looking at stable coins because they understand, how important they are. There's a Howie Lutnick, our boy all over this piece, was speaking at the Chain Analysis Conference last week. And he said that, the stable coins are essential for US dollar homogeny. We need it to perpetuate the treasury system. If the government knows that, the government realizes that, and they want to create, an enabling environment for the perpetuation of it, they probably don't want to let validators on some of these side chains make a ton of money. They want to, push it really just to the holders of these treasuries, and let's reduce the cost as much as possible at the granular points otherwise, and really just push all the profits, into who holds these treasuries. And in which case we could see an explosion of volume on these side chains. I definitely agree with you. It hasn't happened yet. But who knows where we're going? We could see PayPal's stablecoin be issued on one of these things, and they integrate it with Venmo, they integrate it with PayPal, and all of a sudden you have 100 million users across the world or more. That's all it takes, and I think that's why there's an important part of this system being set up is the Mercado Libre play, which we haven't really talked about too much. You need a market. One of the big reasons why PayPal was able to take hold was because of eBay. eBay didn't really make a lot of sense when you had to have these long settlement times. It didn't really work for this type of online auction house. So they had to, they really used PayPal, and it took huge market hold because of the this huge market that was native to the internet. Mercado Libre is basically the Amazon and eBay of South America, of Latin America. All they have to do is integrate one of these things, and we'll see 100 million plus people, way more than that, billion, have access to whatever infrastructure provider that they choose. And we've seen them already have some sort of connections with Tether, with Circle, and with Zappo, who has connections with both, who expressly admit that their goal is to connect to the US dollar, Bitcoin, and stable coins, and be the banking service for all of these things. Zappo is also partnered with Satellogic to put Bitcoin keys in space. I mean, we're seeing a lot of, all they have to do is flip a switch basically at this point, and they can onboard, billions of people if they have a need to go on to use these systems, as long as the cost is low enough. So we could see that happen at any point. I think adoption of these side chains is really dependent on the market first, and Mercado Libre could be that market for 30 plus countries, right?
Yeah. I wish them luck. Actually, I don't wish them luck, but
yeah.
No, I think, and Whitney, getting back to what you said earlier, I think that's the big question in my mind right now, because we've talked about this throughout the years on the show. Like, what can we do to protect ourselves against this? Individuals, become as sovereign as possible. De-Google yourself, grow your own food, use Bitcoin the right way. But do you think there needs to push back against this, because they literally have satellites surveilling? The panopticon is gone from the Pennsylvania State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, where it's a physical place where there's something in the middle that can surveil humans in a physical space within a 100-yard radius, to literally satellites spanning the whole globe and surveilling us from space. Do you think there is going to be a necessary pushback from private sector actors that don't want to be beholden to carbon credit markets to stand up publicly and say, no, I'm not participating in this. I'm not buying carbon credits. I'm not incorporating it into my business? Or is this more of a social movement where we need individuals like the two of you to write pieces to get in front of this and educate people and literally prod and poke the facade to highlight the hypocrisy and the giant scam that all this is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cornerstone of the response really does need to be self-reliance, because if you're hoping on people in the private sector solving this problem for you because they don't like ESG, I don't think that's enough at all. And talking about this public-private play, it's important to keep in mind that what happens, I mean, just look at the Treasury Secretary office alone. So like in Clinton, it was Robert Rubin, Goldman Sachs. He helps repeal Glass-Steagall. And then when that whole bubble pops in 2008, Goldman Sachs' Henry Paulson is Treasury of the Secretary. Then it's Tim Geithner, who worked under Larry Summers, and Robert Rubin is Treasury Secretary under Obama. And then it's Steve Mnuchin, who was involved in the 2008 financial crisis and whose dad was one of the top guys at Goldman Sachs, and he was also Goldman Sachs. So what they do when they're in power is that they create policies that help benefit them. You know, they came from Goldman Sachs with intentions to implement policies that benefit Goldman Sachs. Right. And so generally what happens is that when the private sector wants something, or they've created a big market for something, they've invested lots of money in creating something like the carbon market, and no one's using the carbon market. They are going to then use the public sector to force people to use the carbon market. And so they're trying to do that through the guise of climate emergency, right? And that's not working. So if that's not working, how will they go about and how will they do it? Well, like Mark and I have discussed before, they're trying to go about it the private sector route. Oh, okay, you guys aren't interested in programmable, surveillable money if it's emitted by the central bank. So if it's emitted by a private bank, maybe you will, right? But the other side of this is what's happening in places like Argentina right now, where people have lost so much of their purchasing power. So like before Milei came to power, I think the poverty rate was it was insanely high. I think it was something like 60%. And then Milei came into power and devalued the currency by 50%, which led to a massive loss in purchasing power for Argentinians on top of that. Now Argentinians are so desperate and are being told that they're undergoing quote unquote shock therapy designed by a JP Morgan guy, that they're doing WorldCoin. They're scanning their eyes in the Sam Altman orb for shit coins and a cattle tag, a digital ID. And the idea is to have that be like your access to the internet, and using, these tokens and these stable coins, using Tether, using USDC, whatever's supported by Mercado Libre's giant entity, Mercado Pago, which is also integrated with Brazil's biggest crypto exchange, Mercado Bitcoin, and then there's Ripio in the mix, which is partnered with all of these guys too. They're going to control all the rails that stuff runs on. And that's where people are running because their money has been so devalued and they have no alternative. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is to get people on programmable, surveillable money by any means necessary. So if you won't do it because you're like, oh yeah, this is a way I'm going to use JP Morgan coin and beat the Fed CBDC. If you're not going to get suckered into that, then, it seems like they'll use destabilization and desperation as a way to get people to onboard into the systems that they're creating. They're not just going to spend billions of dollars creating these systems and have no one use them. They're going to try and use either, desperation created by public sector policies or by private sector policies, and then have, sort of like 2008. Oh, look, the private banks have destroyed the economy. Now we need the public sector to come in and rein them in, even though Obama's cabinet that was supposed to be doing that was literally chosen by Citigroup, right? They're the ones that are going to come in and they're going to rein these in, and these are the policies and changes that need to be made. But actually, it's the bankers that wrote the changes that need to be made, right? So we're likely going to get set up for something like that, where they're going to try and make like existing money worthless. And if you want your money to be worth anything and maintain any sort of semblance of purchasing power, you have to use financial products X, Y, and Z. And they're all going to be programmable and surveillable, if not by the private sector, by the public sector. And they're all going to be interoperable. They're going to be all these different wallets and digital ID systems that look like they're different companies, but they're all the same, essentially, in terms that they can export all their data to the same central global database. And, that's essentially the goal here. So how do we fight against that? Don't use the database. Don't use the digital wallet. Don't use the digital ID. Don't interact with the system. And I think also, I think Bitcoin is obviously very key to their plans, but they need Bitcoin to stay, as Larry Fink said, a technology for asset storage. They refuse to have it be a currency. And actually, Jeffrey Epstein gave an interview about Bitcoin that I didn't know about until maybe a couple months ago when we started researching this. Yep. Oh, yes. No idea. He says the exact same thing Larry Fink says. It's not a currency. It's, a technology for asset storage.
There's another very prominent Bitcoiner that likes to roll with that line.
So, yeah. So
Michael Saylor is basically it's property. It's not currency.
Yeah.
Yeah, funny that. Didn't the chief of staff of InQtel come from MicroStrategy? That's interesting. Anyway,
sure did. With Pautos. Yep, sure did.
Yep. So, anyway, basically, if Bitcoin is kept in that box that people like Larry Fink and Jeffrey Epstein and people like them, Larry Summers, presumably, who was on the Zappo advisory board, these guys want Bitcoin to be a specific thing because they can use it. And there's people in the space, like this RSK guy, saying Bitcoin needs to lose its revolutionary ethos. It's got to drop that and become a tool for Wall Street. I think it's pretty obvious what needs to be done to scuttle those plans, which would be ensure the opposite.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Use open source software.
So people need to be putting resources into making that happen. And by
trying my best here, Whitney.
The fact
trying
that,
my best.
Well, sure. But basically to recap on that, if they need the Bitcoin blockchain for asset storage, and presumably, if we're right about what's going on in this article, which we seem to be, carbon markets, they need that blockchain. How do we invert their plans and use the Bitcoin blockchain so that it's the tool of financial freedom it was heralded to be? Because they can't get rid of it without scuttling their own plans.
No.
Right? So how do we...
Bitcoin is money. It's not digital property.
Use it.
It is digital property, but it is money. And it's hard within Bitcoin. There's a lot of hero worship these days. A lot of people getting a lot of pushback.
Yes, well, it's not just Bitcoin. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And pretty much most of the heroes are bitches for bankers, whether it's in Bitcoin or in politics. I'm sorry, but it's
No, Mark, but I'm sure you observed this.
Trump is not here to save you. QAnon, while a very fun time, we all had a great time looking at it. It was an Operation Trust. It was, hey, our guy's in there. Don't worry about it. We got it. And now here we are. And they locked down the country. They printed trillions of dollars. They push big pharma products. I mean, none of these people are going to jail. No. So I think Whitney really nailed it with this inversion thing. And I know it's very controversial within Bitcoin itself, but I think if we kind of use Bitcoin as a mechanism to store things as well. Again, it is a database. We need to enable Bitcoin as a currency as much as possible. Stablecoins are not a scaling option for Bitcoin. It's fucking embarrassing that we're there. That's our best scaling option. I think that's a terrible way, especially when it's treasury based. We can do some fun things with DLCs. We can do some fun things with eCash. We can do fun things with Lightning backed eCash, where we can create, or Lightning channels even, that basically create a stable dollar purchasing ability without actually touching treasuries at all. These are the kind of things we need to play with. I understand and I empathize with people that are looking for dollar instruments in certain economic environments and political environments, but ultimately, if Bitcoin just becomes, okay, 10,000 people got really rich and now it's a data storage blockchain for dollar assets because of Lightning Labs Taproot assets or whatever it is that comes up next. I think we've really failed at the promise that Bitcoin could be. And so I think there's a lot of ways we can fight back, and obviously we need to do things like this, get like-minded people together and talk very earnestly about this stuff, people that don't have financial incentives. I think that's a huge problem in the Bitcoin space, specifically with stable coins, is that so many people in the space are paid for by Tether. And I'm sure a lot of them are well-meaning, but they're not going to talk crap about, the perpetuation of the treasury system by a private company that has onboarded the FBI and the Secret Service to their company to allow, U.S. intelligence and U.S. law enforcement to blacklist addresses. Like, that's not banking the global South. That's not banking the unbanked. That's just like perpetuating this, dollar denominated, debt model over the world, which I think is obviously not something that we want to see. Bitcoin can do so much more. So how can we use Bitcoin cleverly? If they want to use it to store dollar, assets in the witness Merkle, we can use it to store, data cables. We can use it to store, articles like this you can publish with markdown files to Bitcoin. There's a lot of things that we can do. Bitcoin is not going away because it's too important as an enabling environment for a lot of these things. I think this idea that, I saw even Edward Snowden tweet out, Gary Gensler had tears in his eyes as he approved the BlackRock ETF. And it's just like, give me a break, dude. Like, no, the state absolutely wanted Bitcoin to have an ETF. They hold more Bitcoin than anyone. The U.S. DOJ and private companies within the United States hold more Bitcoin than anyone else. Significant portion of the supply. This idea that this is this complete counter revolution to U.S. dollar interest, I think, is a little bit misguided and naive at this point. And now we have to really make sure that we don't allow it to be co-opted by dollarizers. We don't allow Bitcoin to be dollarized, and instead we push back and we say, hey, I have an ability to send you, Marty, money without any fucking spook getting in the fucking way at all. And that's fucking important, and that's magical. And that's something that, we need to make sure stays possible, that, we own UTXOs. We own the ability to do that. We'll be able to transact, on Bitcoin to each other for, for the rest of our lives. How can we get 1 billion people there? How can we get more people to have that same permissionless access to Bitcoin that we have because we were quote unquote early adopters, right? There were much earlier adopters than us that have a lot more Bitcoin than us. Who are they? Why is D-Hawk? Why is John Reed? Why is Larry Summers on the advisory board to Zappo in 2013, 2014? These huge titans of Citibank, of Visa, why is Epstein talking about Bitcoin back then? There's a lot of people that have a lot more Bitcoin than us, right?
Another important
How do we
link
remain?
note.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry for
No, you're great, brother. All good.
Zappo, acquired by Coinbase, holds all the ETF Bitcoin.
Yeah, the custody. Yes, exactly. Custody solution that Zappo, they were. I think they literally marketed themselves as the Fort Knox of Bitcoin. I think, which is kind of
an interesting
ominous.
analogy to choose. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And
the Titanic of ships. It's like, what actually happened to Fort Knox here?
Whitepill. Don't want to be too optimistic, and we should certainly be aware and fighting against all this stuff. But I am incredibly encouraged by all the innovation that's happening, particularly with Xiaomi and Mints, whether that's on the Cashew protocol or the Fedimint protocol. It does come with some custody trade-offs, but I think the privacy benefits and the fact that you can build these modular DLC stability pools within Xiaomi eCash systems that give you the same functionality of the essentially controlled stablecoins is very promising. I mean, we're doing everything we can at 1031 to back the companies pushing the industry in this particular direction. We've got the Fedi team here, the Mutiny team here, working hard to do this. And I think it's a combination of things that are going to lead to this success. The backing of these projects, number one. And then two, what you guys are doing, like educating the market and really instilling confidence in people to push back against this, because it is a bit daunting. It is a bit ominous. It is a David versus Goliath like fight where people have been psyoped into believing they have no agency and therefore no ability to push back against this. But it's here. The tools are being built. You just have to be aware of them, support them, adopt them. And then at the same time, as Whitney likes to say, like stab a needle in the eye of everybody trying to push us towards the digital panopticon.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to say, too, that I think there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin media space that will never talk about this or what you just mentioned. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of money and effort has been put into specifically homogenizing media discourse in the Bitcoin space, because they want Bitcoiners as much as possible to be compliant, while Larry Fink and his ilk do what they want with Bitcoin and make it what they want it to be, so that people are content with number go up and sort of the Saylor-esque talking points that have gotten a lot of, a lot of people have heard those versus what you just mentioned from example. There needs to be a cultural shift in Bitcoin in the opposite direction of what this Diego guy from Rootstock said, where he's like, we need to drop the whole, stop fiscal irresponsibility of the banks and central banks and, be a challenge and threat to their power. We have to drop that if we want to get rich. I mean, that's the mentality there. And I feel like the Saylor mentality really isn't that different from that. We have to push people in the other direction, because if we go in the direction they're pushing those, people to go in, people that want to drop the ethos or whatever and make Bitcoin just a tool for Wall Street. No. If we let that happen, very bad things happen, and there has to be a fight. And there's a specific effort that's been launched against people that hold Bitcoin to try and get them to be compliant in that sense. And that's through, controlling the discourse in the media space. There needs to be a desire among Bitcoiners to return to the original ethos, not the opposite. There needs to be a fight for that. People need to care about that again.
Imagine the glory.
Compliance is not defiance. I think, as the Bitcoin Bugle boys like to say, they say compliance is defiance, which obviously is making fun of this stuff. And I totally agree, Whitney. And, I think it was very said very clearly in the Saylor keynote from Pack Bitcoin 2022, literally as FTX was collapsing around us, literally, our phones are blowing up, all this crazy shit's happening, November 2022. Saylor's on stage saying, don't be a martyr, don't fight the system. Stablecoins on Lightning is a $10 trillion industry. Let's go, let's bring it on. We're all going to get rich. Don't be a martyr. Now,
Bend over for Larry.
Yeah. Bite the pillow. They're going in raw. I don't want this to be like calling for people to go be a martyr. Like, I'm not saying go set yourself on fire in front of the BlackRock headquarters. That's not helpful or useful either. It's not productive at all. Plus the carbon emissions from burning yourself, I think, it's very bad. I would hate to see.
You're gonna get an estate tax ding on top.
Yeah, your
of that.
family will be taxed for that.
Yeah.
And imagine the glory.
I owe Satellogic.
Imagine the glory. I think we can.
But there has to be things we have to do.
Yes, the path that we're describing here is a harder path to take. It's going to take longer. It's going to take a lot more effort. It's going to take a lot more education and new learnings from individuals to actually interact with this, compared to an ETF where you interact with TD Ameritrade or whoever, and you just click a button and that's your interaction with Bitcoin. That's not the future we want. We want to actually interact with the protocol and the layers built on top of it and actually hold and use Bitcoin correctly. And I want to paint the picture of a glorious victory where we successfully do that. And if we can build out the tools and make Bitcoin as useful and provide the market with fundamental utility that gives people agency over their money, Bitcoin number will go up naturally from that path as well. It's just going to be longer and harder, but I promise you.
Yeah, but it doesn't involve everyone's financial enslavement, and it doesn't enable the fiscal irresponsibility of the commercial and central banks to dump all the irresponsible debt generated by their money printing into Bitcoin and be like, oh, problem solved, keep printing forever. I mean, that's basically what they want to do. It's insane.
It is.
And there's people that are like, that's fine because now I have money. And it's like,
yeah.
So you remember why you got into this? And I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just, let's go back.
People get on us, guys. I think, I'm still new at, some of this stuff, and, I still read comments and whatever. And I see people say stuff, where they're like, well, you don't offer any solutions. You're just black pilled. You're like doom shilling. And it's like, I'm actually like a really upbeat, optimistic guy. Like, I think we're going to win. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we have an incredibly ghoulish apparatus that we need to fight. But I really, I'm a monomyth guy. I believe in our history is fake, and but the stories are real. And in the stories, the good comes together in the end, and they defeat the dragon or whatever, right? And I think that's what we have to do here. And I'm really thankful for shows like TFTC and certain platforms where we actually can talk about this stuff still. There's like a couple of them. And getting us like-minded people together just to be able to talk freely about this stuff is so important. This is fiery stuff, I think, with this piece and particularly with kind of this conspiracy of what they're trying to do. But it hasn't happened yet. Like none of this stuff has really been enacted yet. It's all about to be enacted. And there's a bunch of stuff that we can still do and push back. And as much as Bitcoin is an empowerment tool, for a lot of these evil people, it also can be an empowerment tool, for revolutionary, action. So, maybe they made a mistake if they tried to co-opt Bitcoin and they let a bunch of us get funding. Maybe they made a mistake by letting, your fund be able to fund Mutiny and Fetty, and by letting us get some capital and deploy it efficiently. Like we actually have an ability here. What happens? I think this is one of the most important years for Bitcoin ever. I think it's one of the most important moments ever for humanity, because this revolution is happening regardless. This digitalization, this panopticon is going to be built. And we have to kind of make technological strides and pushbacks now. And there are so many ways we can do it. But ultimately, it's really about, the revolution is an internal thing. It's a singular thing. And, we just have to live better lives, and we have to, give the lives to our kids that, that they deserve, and show them the world that they deserve. And we can win on so many different levels. The human spirit is a beautiful, wonderful thing, and it can't be captured by a blockchain, run by some federated key signers somewhere. There's so many things that just can't be bogged down by a blockchain. So, we got to really just, buckle down, figure out, who our enemies are. And a lot of them are in sheep's clothing. And we roll down the red carpet for them at all these events, as they're literally manufacturing consent for censorship, for dollarization, and the enslavement of the global South via dollars. And we need to push back on these things, not be afraid to talk about them, because discourse is the first thing that they capture. It's also the first ground that we can win with truth. Truth resonates like crazy. There's a reason why I jokingly refer to Whitney as like the ghost in the machine, where she gets crazy numbers on all these things, but it's like, she's pushing back on their very tools. Like, that's what's so funny about, we're enslaved by the algorithms, right? But also we can fight back using those same algorithms that, are trying to enslave us. We can push back with good content because it does resonate. So it's really important that we do this stuff. I'm just thankful to be here. Yeah. And there's so much left to do, but this is where it starts, really, is discourse.
Well, discourse, and I'm very happy you said the R word, because that's talk about language control. That's one word, revolution, that some Bitcoiners like, don't say it. Don't say it. Like, we don't want the state to think that we're pushing it up against them. It's like, no, we need a revolution. Look around you. Look at what's going on. Look at this carbon credit program. They're literally sending satellites in the sky to send data to smart contracts that dictate whether or not you can spend money at the grocery store next month. Like, it is time for a revolution. The revolution does not need to be bloody, I don't think. Like you just said, Mark, I think we have the ability to leverage the same tools that they do in a different way to have a successful revolution against this impending fucking hellscape that they're trying to push on us. And you can't be afraid of that word. You have to be open about it. Go ahead, Whitney.
I just want to chime in really quick. So part of what we're talking about here, part of the way to like defeat this apparatus that as Mark referred to it, so much of what they do, including like their media ops, in efforts to control discourse, but also just like getting people to onboard to stuff when they otherwise wouldn't, it all runs on fear. right? And like all the stuff that happened during COVID, people fell in line because of fear. It's all fear-based, pretty much everything they do. A great way to not fall into that is not be afraid of these people, no matter what psyop they throw at you. And I think this year, election year, not just in the US, but in much of the world, unprecedented fear-based psyops are going to be coming one after the other until they get enough people to comply and acquiesce. And the way to get around that is to not fall into it. It's the trap, and a lot of it is the media discourse. And I think, the more controlled online discourse becomes, the greater the effort will be to use it to get people to be very afraid of what's happening. Yeah. And if you unplug a little bit and spend more time in like the actual world, you are much less likely to feel that way. And I think that's why during COVID, they wanted so much of our discourse to be online. And then they took even greater control of the online discourse. And we know now, under the guise of election censorship, they're going to clamp down even more on online discourse and lead it in very particular directions. They want Americans in particular to be at each other's throats. Textbook divide and conquer, among other things, though. I mean, they have this whole war on domestic terror apparatus, all this stuff about civil war, and we need this and that. Regular Americans are generally on the same side, and they want to divide everyone, and it's all through fear. And they've been doing this psyop after psyop after psyop, whether it's 9/11, COVID, you name it. I mean, it's all fear-based and wants to alienate you from your local community. Like, again, it's about self-reliance at the local level. That's a big part of the response, but it's also, getting people, not just yourself, though obviously that's where you start, but making sure that the fear doesn't anchor in to, where you are based. I think that's a big part of it. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, in terms of like this, like in 2 points, what you said earlier, election year, fear-based, divide and conquer is being employed. If you're not for Biden, you should be for Trump. If you're not for Trump, you should be for Biden. Bullshit.
They do this every 4 years. How have people not figured it out?
And we have an example of this because nothing matters because the FISA reauthorization and the expansion of FISA this week. You have a Republican controlled House, you have a Democrat president, and they're both like, yeah, we're gonna surveil you more.
Same shit, different rhetoric. Only difference. I mean, it's a rhetorical difference that's ultimately meaningless.
And with on the line of like pushing all the discourse digital, like what they just expanded FISA to be able to do is going to be able to give the government the ability to granularly target people that are exhibiting speech that they don't like. Like they just got the ability to literally tell coffee shops, like, you need to give us all your Wi-Fi traffic data so that we can surveil everybody. FISA, which was originally supposed to be targeted towards foreigners.
Terrorists.
Yeah, terrorists. Now it's literally, the government just told your coffee shop they had to give
what Palantir originally was. So Palantir was originally total information awareness, and then they tried to rename it terrorist information awareness, but total information awareness is what they always wanted. And that's surveilling everyone for everything. And it's surveilling people at the biological level, like to stop pandemics before they start narrative. That was part of it. It was also about financial surveillance. It was surveilling what you buy at the grocery store. That is literally what they are doing again. But it's a mix of public entities and private entities that are all in these involved in these opaque partnerships. So it's not one clearly defined program at DARPA like it was originally supposed to be. But the goal is to completely erode privacy, to completely surveil everything, and prevent X before it happens. X being literally anything they don't want to happen or say they don't want to happen. So prevent crime before it happens, pre-crime. William Barr, Attorney General under Trump, legalized pre-crime in the United States. It will come. They've set it up, and they want it all to run on your data. They want to prevent, they'll say it's for terrorist attacks, it's for pandemics, it's for crisis X, Y, and Z, it's for climate calamity. We have to prevent it before it happens. It's all algorithmic based, but they can only manufacture consent for that if there's a climate of fear.
Yeah.
Period.
What's that Trevor Moore that Trevor Moore tweet where he's like, hey, what if, all these spooks discovered, through the MK Ultra program that you can control humans through fear-based tactics, and now they simulate, events in the public to instill fear to like control the masses, ha ha ha. And then, of course, he died, a month later or whatever. But I think that idea of, fear-based control, it's something that we've seen. There's this great Baudrillard book, Simulacra and Simulation, that, talks about this idea of, if you are a person in a bodega and someone comes in to rob the place, and this fear is instilled in you because someone comes in with a gun and holds it up at the person and goes to rob the register, and you're fearful for your life. And then as soon as it's over, they turn and they go, hey, just kidding. I'm actually an actor and he's an actor and this is a fake gun. It doesn't matter. The fear and the emotional output that you had because of this simulated input, it doesn't matter that it's fake. You still have that same emotional response and you still react in the way as if it was real. They've realized that this is such an incredible tactic to control people at an individual level. This very clearly works at a mass level. And now we're seeing, fear-based tactics everywhere. I mean, COVID made us fearful of each other. The climate, game here makes us fearful of, it makes humans basically. Exactly. It makes us fearful of the earth, and also the thing that causes the weather to go bad is human action. It makes the enemy of the world humans are like themselves. And this is something explicitly stated by like the Club of Rome, ghouls that, are behind a lot of these things. They've really turned humans into being fearful of each other, divided. If there's a subject they don't want people to talk about, they create, through Operation Mockingbird and other tactics, they create manufactured discourse about manufactured events to shepherd people into this fake false dichotomy. And now we're stuck in these two choices that were both fake, to begin with, that were simulated through fake events. And it's really wild when you see, okay, hey, YouTube is bad because Google's bad. We all know that, right? So let's all go to Rumble. Well, hey, Cantor Fitzgerald took Rumble, public, right? It's the same people that are. It, yeah. Peter Thiel funds it from Palantir. It's the same people that were fearful. What are we afraid of Google? Oh, because they have all our data and they run everything, and they're not so great. Well, Palantir is better. Cantor Fitzgerald is better. Why is Peter Thiel better than Susan? YouTube. Why is that any better? It's this total false dichotomy, and we fall hook, line, and sinker for it because we have these Pied Pipers that are literally paid, to lead us there. You can see that on X so like obviously with the people paid by Elon to post on there. This idea that X is the public square is just so ridiculous. Now they're going to start charging for posts.
The amount of murder videos I've been fed and like fights at schools that I've been fed. And another thing, it's getting so egregious, like around the totality solar eclipse, like the amount of content that was just being flooded with, oh my gosh, the world's going to end after this. There's going to be earthquakes. Like they're going to cyber attack. Like
they want people scared as fuck all the time. That's what they're doing. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And I almost fell for it over the weekend with the Iran bombing Israel. I was like, oh shit, World War III. And then I took a couple minutes. I was at a baseball game with my boys and my wife, and I was like, you know what? This is definitely something being manipulated here. All wars are banker wars, and both sides are being played in this.
Iran
in this
totally
scheme.
wasn't cooed by the CIA. It's totally not a world empire. All of these conflicts are real. Russia and Ukraine didn't have the exact same COVID policies. It's lunacy that we understand so much about what's happening, zoomed out. And then when we get locked into these little, I'm on team A, I'm on team B, it's like, fuck that guy. He's wearing the wrong color on his shirt. I'm a Red Sox fan. He's a Yankees fan. Like, fuck that guy. It's like, no, we're all being controlled. Let's get together here. Even sometimes I think with, some of the dissonance that I think was ultimately generally correct, like with COVID, Obviously it was a pretty wild time to be looking around, looking for any signal anywhere. But so much of COVID dissonance was, absurd things about vaccines and all this stuff. And I'm no vaccine fan. I wouldn't do it. I'm not vaccinated. But a lot of the discourse was very controlled and very insane, and it's graphene and nano and like all these things.
You don't have a 5G antenna in you? Good job, dude.
Not yet. Not yet. But I don't know ultimately, right? Like, I'm not sure. I'm just a guy with internet access for the moment. But so much of the discourse was controlled so quickly to divide each other and to distract from. No one talks about the lockdowns. No one talks about printing trillions of dollars. Like, it's all about the vaccines and are you on this side or this side? And it became this politicized thing that was literally inverted in front of our eyes, where Kamala is saying, I'm not taking the vaccine because it's Trump's vaccine, to 6 months later, I'm getting yelled at and being called a Trumper because I'm not vaccinated. And it's like, well, what the he's the vaccine guy. Like, what? Like, did no one just see this phase shift happen in real life? Am I going crazy? Like, what happened?
Excuse me. You're not a Trumper. You're a murdering Trumper. Okay. You're murdering your grandmother.
Exactly. It's just, it's so wild. And I think even some of the smart people really fell for it. I mean, and it's really tough to stay up on psyops. I mean, it's very hard. But I think in general, when there's something that is trying to divide people to a dichotomy, the dichotomy is wrong. Like the world is not black and white. It's very gray. And so whenever there's very clear black and white, tropes, that's a very, very big trope of some of these, groups that control us is false dichotomies of black and white. And just whenever you see that, you should raise a little flag and be wary of that, in my opinion.
Agreed. Be aware, freaks. Be aware. Be the patriot you want to see in control. Don't depend on Q. Okay. This has been great. 2 hours. Do we have anything we should leave the freaks with, Whitney? Any final thoughts?
Don't let them, I don't know. I mean, there's so much stuff to say. I feel like I've already said it, just, I guess, repeating. Don't fall into the fear-based psyops. It's just, maybe we should get offline a little bit more, everybody. And also, please do not let Bitcoin become Larry Fink's little bitch. I mean, that's just embarrassing. Yeah. Please don't do it. That's my succinct wrap up.
Plant a garden.
Yeah.
Number go up amnesia is a good phrase I'm going to take from this one. Because it is hard.
Take it, baby.
Sitting there, your old Bitcoin numbers going up. You're like, oh shit, this feels good. You have to fight that urge. It's
totally.
Well, they want to try and buy people out and be like, oh, you wanted to be a revolutionary, did you? Well, here's, 6 figures.
Yeah.
Go
How about
yourself.
a second saltwater pool? How about a hot tub, Mark? It's like, how about you peel off a little Satoshi and get yourself something nice? It's like, no, I don't give a fuck about that, actually. Like, I got into this stuff, totally not because I was never a thing about getting rich. And, I want to use, whatever funds I've been lucky to get to establish sustainable, which I know is a dirty word these days, but to create sustainable architecture that, can really push back on these things. And I think we all have a duty, of Bitcoiners, to keep Bitcoin permissionless, keep the spirit alive of the Murshas and the Amir Takis and the Martys and push that shit forward, and keep Bitcoin freaky. Don't let BlackRock dollarize Bitcoin, please. That's my final word.
Well, I know for certain I can give you 2. That's what I'm looking for. It's not closure. You can understand well that there's at least 4 or 5 teams working to build products that push us in the right direction. Here, right in Bitcoin Commons here in Austin. Educate yourself, freaks. Don't be afraid to speak up. That's been one of my goals, initiatives, I guess you can say, over the last 6 to 9 months, particularly, is I repeat it. I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, Marty, I can't believe you're saying it again, but it cannot be understated. You need the confidence to speak up against this. There are very prominent figures in the space who we've discussed throughout this 2-hour conversation that want to push you a certain way. yes, they may say a lot of right things, but you have to listen for the dog whistles trying to push you in a certain direction subconsciously. And don't be afraid to speak out. Say, no, Bitcoin is money. I do want to use it to transact. I do think the US dollar reserve system is inherently evil, and I do want to replace it with Bitcoin. I want to use Bitcoin as my money. I want to use it in a self-sovereign fashion, in a peer-to-peer fashion. And that's not bad to say. It's not bad to vocalize those thoughts, especially there may be very rich people. There may be very prominent people. There may be people who are very articulate, certainly more articulate than me, that put a good smile on. They jack people up. They help number go up. But in the long run, the timeline of Bitcoin's success being an asset that's Larry Fink's little pet rock that he integrates into the financial system is not the future, not the timeline that I would live on. So have the confidence to speak up.
Yeah.
Whitney, Mark.
Well said. I thought that was very articulate, Marty.
I'm not known for, I can't pronounce words.
Clip it. We'll,
Clip it, freaks. When can we expect part 2 to drop?
Ooh.
Hopefully
am I pushing timelines on you guys?
Month-ish.
A month? Okay.
Yeah. Halving is a little crazy over here in Bitcoin Magazine world. But yeah, I'm hoping to get some good headway in it in the next week or two. Yeah, I'd say sometime in May.
All right, so we'll congregate again at some point in May to follow up.
Sounds
on this.
good.
I think repetition, but to keep getting this message out there is important.
Agreed. Well, thanks a lot, Marty.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Peace and love.